Good afternoon. Um, I just wanted to share some thoughts here on the last day of Black History Month. As many of you know, I am really into, my family history, into genealogy, and just history at large. So, just a interesting story I'd start with is something uh, I found pretty interesting is when looking back in the records, I was able to trace a lot of our family really far, but I kind of focused only on seven generations to kind of do some comparative, analysis, so to speak, of different branches of the family. So when I traced back about seven generations from my sons back to my third great grandparents, at that point, I should have 32 people, which would be 16 sets of great 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 grandparents. On my lines, I was able to get 17 out of those 32. So a lot of good information, but still a lot out there. But what I did find unique was in that back to those generations, I was able to identify 17 uh, great 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 grandparents, and out of those 17, pretty much all were slaves except for the Rafal line, which was also spelled Raphael and Raphael throughout history, and of course the Gartner line. Those two lines we were able to trace back via documentation predating the Civil War, which would indicate that they were in fact free people and they were listed as mulatto, whereas everyone else on the other 15 lines, we could only trace back to the 1870s, which would indicate that prior to the Civil War, on those different federal censuses, they were not documented because they were in fact slaves. So one of the things I found neat was looking at the Williams line in particular, is we trace it back to my great 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 grandmother, whose name was Edith Carolyn Williams, and of course, as history shows, she was born in 1824, and she would have been a slave until she was freed, either right after, sometime right after the Civil War. So she first appeared on the records on the 1870 federal census, which is when most slaves would first appear being free. And it's documented at that time that she was not able to read, not able to write, nor were any of her children. And if you look 10 years later on the 1880 census, it's marked that she was able to read, she was able to write, and all of her children were able to read and write, which is just incredible when you think about that. Just, um, you know, 10 years prior, they were all illiterate and newly freed people trying to find their way. You fast forward to the 1880s, they can all read, they can all write. Some of them are even in seeking higher education. And of course, if you fast forward 10 more years, you have 1890. You have some of them are hold master degrees and doctorate degrees, such as Charles H. Williams and Robert S. Williams, who both at that time were ministers. They were pastors in the CME church. So then you fast forward again to 1900, and you have at that point Charles Williams is a elder within the CME church. Robert Williams is a bishop in the CME church, and he actually travels to London as well as Belgium and Germany that year as part of the Third Ecumenical uh, Methodist Conference, which is pretty unique because at that time his mother is still alive. She didn't pass away till 1907 at the age of 79. So she would have been able to have her son come back and tell her about Europe, what he saw, the things he was able to do. One of the highlights of his trip is he was able to speak and address the conference. And there was a book published in 1901 in which his speech is recorded in. He's also in pictures of that book. I was lucky enough to get a first edition copy from an antique bookstore. So that would have been unique for her to be able to sit back, see her son in a book, see his speech published, and then he turned around in 1902 and published his own book of sermons. Again, she would have been there and been alive to see her son become an author. This son who had already attained his doctor's degree, became a bishop of the church, was serving as president of colleges, uh, but he was also an author. So this would have been, um, her reaping the benefits or seeing the benefits of her sacrifice and her life and her endurance as a slave. So I just found that very unique because you can still see that in 1900, 1910, there were still people who could not read. A lot of them that previously were slaves, and because of their older age or whatever the case may be, they never actually had that desire to try to read or write, I suppose, or they didn't have the opportunity. But with her and her household, within less than a 10-year period, 5 year, well, yeah, 5 to 10 year period, they went from being totally illiterate to highly educated and working towards owning land. I thought that was pretty unique. Um, so another thing I would add is that I really would like to share, and I'm very proud of in our families. We had a lot of men who actually married, stayed with their families, raised their children, and contributed to their communities. So if you go to the Galilee Baptist Church in Keithville, for example, my third great grandfather, Abraham Maiden, was one of the founding members. He also went on to help found Macedonia Baptist Church, and later he had his own church when he became a minister on his own property. Um, then you have my great great grandfather paternally. His name was Robert White. He was a Freemason, a deacon at the Liberty CME Church. He's buried out there along with his wife, children, and grandchildren, and played an integral part in that community. The same as on our maternal side, my great great grandfather was name was Yancey Williams, also known as Jasper Yancey Williams, a Freemason, active member of the Friendship CME Church, where some of his children and grandchildren are buried today. So it's very unique to see the role that a lot of these men play, but as well as their organizations, looking at how Masonry, fraternal organizations, and church is what really brought and oppressed people to be productive citizens within the United States. So a lot of people do say it's Black history, but it's really American history because it's part of that bigger, broader history. So it shouldn't be marginalized as such. Anyway, I do like to share this type of knowledge with the newer generation. And one way I like to do that is, of course, by writing and doing the things I can. For starters, I definitely would like to thank Dr. Skip Mason for the great work that he does with the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. And of course, he gave me an opportunity to share some of this on one of his shows last year as he commemorated the 150th anniversary of the CME Church. Around that time, I had the honor of hosting a Black History Month program in Germany, where I was able to highlight some of the family history in conjunction with Black history. And also did write an article that I was lucky enough to have three newspapers carry, one of which was the Longview News Journal out of Longview, Texas. So they ran a really nice article for me that did highlight the importance of Black history, but also told some of that story of the Williams family and the CME Church. Um, so here more recently, while I was home, of course, I dug into some family history research while I was visiting family and caring for family. And one of the things I did try to do was to bring some attention to a burial site that has very deep history for Caddo Parish within it that currently is not associated with a church or any organization. Though I have been able to talk to commissioners, the land assessors, and I've actually contacted the owner. So we're in talks now on finding a way to preserve and keep that place respectable and as it should be. And one thing I did do to try to bring some attention to that is, of course, I wrote an article that I was very happy that the Shreveport Sun did run while I was still in Caddo Parish. So they did run that article. And again, my goal was simply to share that knowledge and education, but also to bring about awareness so that when we're trying to do things like preserve historic lands, historic grave sites, and churches, that there's some public knowledge out there maybe to generate some support. So for a lot of the uh, Black history and Black families, we go off oral history, which can be good. I've tried to stick to finding the documents because sometimes the documents do tell a different story. You have a lot of marriages within family lines, and then you have divorces and things of that nature that may not be told in the oral history that you can find in documentation. And a lot of this proved very valuable to me when I still had older relatives alive, like my grandmother on my mother and father's side, as well as my great great aunts on my mother's side. As I found these things, I was able to show it to them, talk to them, ask them questions, and then it would jog their memory. They would tell me things that had not come up in previous conversations. Lastly, I would certainly encourage for anyone who's really into genealogy, really want to tap into their Black history, is to definitely use the DNA testing because it does add a different layer. So I first started my research in 2010 as a little project I wanted to do for my son. And of course, here I am 11 years later, still rolling. But I added the DNA piece around 2015. I've had already been researching for about 5 years. And since then, it totally has opened a lot of doors. Because, of course, for starters, most people probably already know by now. But I've had mine analyzed by two or three different um, companies or sites, and they've all come back generally 70% African, 30% European. And with that European, some of the biggest lines are, of course, German. And of course, anyone who knows their history know that most of the European royal houses have German ancestry, including England, which of course is known as the House of Windsor, which was not known as such prior to World War One. They had a very German name. It was like the House of Saxon Colbert something, and it all traces back to Germany, where you have the Mountbatten family, and you have the Hessen-Darmstadt seat of government, and the Battenbergs and all of that. So when I started further using these DNA sites and systems to compare DNA and contrast things of that nature, that's when I started getting things such as seeing that I was connected to the current royal houses of about 10 different countries. And when you trace their ancestry, of course, the further back you go, it gets smaller and smaller. They're all related anyway. And I think one of the biggest ways to demonstrate this would be World War One, because that's when you had the leader of England was, of course, King George V. The leader of Germany was, of course, Tsar Wilhelm. And in Germany, you had, of course, Tsar Nikolai II. And, you go on and on. All of those guys were either brothers, sisters, or cousins. When you research them, they were all grandkids and great grandkids of Queen Victoria. Um, so that is how, when you get into this whole DNA piece, you could be related to so many people because a lot of them were actually related. And of course, to try to keep the bloodlines, clean or pure, when they ran out of people to marry, they would just marry each other. And there's numerous examples of that throughout history in the English royal lines, and one of them still exists, which would of course be Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, who's her cousin. They are both great grandchildren of Queen Victoria. But anyway, so with that, I did connect with about 60 royals across about 10 or 15 different countries. But interestingly enough, the one that I connect the closest with that's still alive is, of course, Prince Philip, who's 99 and currently hospitalized in London. But we did connect on two segments of DNA on my Y line and one segment on my MT line. So that would make him the closest relative to me of all the royals alive. Now, if you go back historically, there are two others that connect to me just as close, and they all go back to that Mountbatten, Battenberg, Hessen, Darmstadt area. Uh, and they were from the Greek royal house, which should make sense to everyone because, of course, Prince Philip was actually born Prince of Greece before he actually married the Queen and came over to England. And of course, his mother what was German as well, and it goes on back. So one cool thing about that is as you continue to research this German DNA I have, this connection with the royals, you go back to this lady known as Princess Charlotte Sophia, and she was, I believe it was Mickelberg or something really weird like that, but she was a German princess, and she's in that line. She's actually the great grandmother of Queen Victoria. Now, she had a unique situation where she was basically mixed because she had some Portuguese ancestry that tied back into the Moorish line, and of course her European line. And of course, there's numerous books about her, numerous paintings of her that do highlight certain features. Either way, I'm actually reading a book about her now that I was lucky enough to have autographed by the author, very nice lady, Dr. Stephanie Myers, and she did great work in this book, tracing down just a lot of historical documents that do back up and substantiate a lot of what people would like to say are just myths and rumors. But the cool thing is with tracing all of that, she would definitely be one of my ancestors, one of my relatives. Now, the only sad part is while I am by DNA connected to her descendants, being I match with King Edward. I match with King George. I match with Prince Philip, his mom, Charles, and William, all in that system. She's not in that system. Now, some would ask why, right? But for whatever reason, they decided not to re-exhume her, remains to add her DNA to the database as they've done with so many other royals. So I can't say definitively that I would be related or connected to Queen Charlotte, but I can say because across 8 generations, I'm connected with about 10 to 12 of her descendants, that there's a very high possibility or probability that I would be related to her, and that would be maybe where my connection with people like Prince Charles, Prince Philip, and Queen Victoria come from. But again, it just shows how what we sometimes like to marginalize and call Black history, which is our history that we should be proud of as Black people, whether you want to, whether you're of African descent or not, or whether you're a citizen of Africa or not, is your history. So you should have pride in it. But it is part of the bigger story of the world, and sometimes I think really digging into that um, family history, looking into those federal censuses, the birth certificates, death certificates, all these different items that are out there, and then of course looking at the DNA connections. I think no one has really exemplified this more than Dr. Henry Gates. I love what he's doing with finding your roots, and he's showing it on a national level where there's so many people that he's showing on his show that they're related, and of course looking at them you wouldn't know it, but it's the DNA that's telling the story. And I think it gives good motivation for all of us to explore your roots. So I'll end it there because this is going on 20 minutes now. But I would say for a lot of the people out there who always follow my posts, thank you very much. I've had several people reach out to me on the family history piece, so I do enjoy that. I've been able to join several family, reunion or family line pages where we, exchange information and pictures, and all it does is just make the story that much more solid, but much more interesting. So with that, I hope you all have a blessed day. I hope that everyone was able to really take a moment during February to do something to get a little more smarter on Black history and on their own family history. So thanks for watching. Look forward to any comments you may have, and have a blessed day.